Hello everyone, this is yet another Sunday webinar by Welcome Solutions. In these webinars we invite PhDs and other professionals to tell us their success stories and the story of their professional development and interesting career moves that they made in the past and how it came about that they found themselves in the place they are now. And if you would like to get more of such content, please subscribe to this channel. And also, you're very welcome to comment on this content on YouTube. We will be happy to take all your questions and we'll answer all your comments. And today I have a great pleasure to introduce Dr. Lindy Ledohowski, who is a former English teacher and then English professor in Canada. And she was a professor before becoming an EdTech CEO for academic writing software platform EssayJack. She has won numerous awards for her teaching, research, and publications, and is now an award-winning entrepreneur. She has published both peer-reviewed scholarship and popular pieces on writing and transitioning from the academy into entrepreneurship. I couldn't be happier. Thank you so much, Lindy, for joining us today. Thank you for accepting our invitation. And now I would like to give the floor to you so that you can introduce yourself to the audience. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks so very much, Natalia. It is lovely to be here. Happy Sunday to everyone, or whenever you end up watching this one. It's great to be here. So that was a really nice introduction, and as you say, so I began my sort of formal grown-up career as an English teacher. So I taught high school English. So in the North American context, that's like grade 10 to grade 12, so age 15 to 17-ish. So I taught English and debating at the high school level. And then I went back to school and did my master's, PhD, and postdoctoral fellowship. And throughout that, I was also teaching at the University of Toronto, which is where I did my graduate school. And I was teaching English, and I was teaching critical writing about poetry and critical writing about literature. And then upon completion, while I was in the middle of doing my postdoctoral fellowship, I got a tenure track job. So the way that it works in North America, so there's a bunch of different ranks in terms of the formal academy and being a professor. So typically, you start off with, say, a tenure track job at the rank of assistant professor, and that's a permanent job, like it's a salaried position. And then if you go up the ranks, the next step is usually promotion to associate, and that often comes at the same time as tenure. And then years down the road, once you've got a couple of books, you can go up for full professor, and there's that trajectory. Then there's also other ranks in terms of contract teaching. So that's called sessional or adjuncting. And essentially that's you're paid on contract per course that you teach. So I was in the tenure track route. And so I was teaching English at the University of Waterloo and in that, and it was great. And my husband is also an academic. And so he was on that tenure track at a different university in a different city. And we were sort of figuring out, okay, well, how do we have a life together, seeing as how we're married and we quite like each other? And so I started at that point to think about life outside of the academy. Now, I think it's probably helpful to talk about that. I mean, even though this was a few years ago now, almost 10 years ago, when I was quitting my job, it was the height of the financial crisis. And so there was a lot of pressure to say, don't leave a full-time professor's job. It's a financial crisis. Who knows what's going to happen? And as we talk today, I've landed on my feet, or at least, on my feet so far. And I think it's helpful to tell that story because right now, in the middle of this pandemic, the job market for academics, people who are newly finishing PhDs or who are already on the job market, it's a really bleak time. And education as we know it is changing radically. And those changes, some of them in terms of the distance learning and the online learning are changes that are probably going to outlast the pandemic. So I think being able to share my story, which is about, landing on your feet at a moment in time when the job market looks bleak, or it might feel like there aren't any other options out there, I think is just helpful to sort of hear that story, because there will be a lot of people who always dreamed of being a professor and won't get the chance to be a professor now, given that there are more people graduating than there are those permanent jobs in the system. And I feel that it would be a great tragedy if you lived out your life always feeling like the life you were living was second best, and if only you had been a professor. So I like to sort of say it's helpful to hear somebody's story who was a professor, and it was fine, but at the end of the day, it was just a job. And so when the things didn't line up well enough for that particular job, I went and did other things. And so some of the other things that I did first upon quitting, I started consulting. And that was interesting and rewarding in a bunch of different ways. Firstly, because it got me to learn how to charge for my services, which was something as an academic I didn't know. And then it was through consulting and still thinking about academic writing and wanting to help students that we ultimately came up with the EdTech solution, which I'm now the head of. And it's a company called EssayJack, EssayJack, and you can find it at EssayJack.com. But what EssayJack, the platform is it's smart templating for academic writing. So essentially we kind of said, okay, so we know all of this stuff about academic writing, and students don't necessarily know that, whether it's undergraduate students, graduate students, even high school students. And wouldn't it be great if we could use technology to kind of demystify and decode some of the things that can often seem very opaque about what the expectations are when it comes to the genre of academic writing. So scientific papers, journal articles at the high end, but then everything down to, you know, your short book review or essay that you've got to submit on, you know, an event in history or something like that. So that's what the technology was. And we've just finished or just celebrated our 5th anniversary of founding the company. And so that's, as I say, you know, hopefully that means we've landed on our feet. So that's in a nutshell, you know, high school teacher, turned graduate student, turned university professor, turned consultant, turned EdTech CEO along the way.
That's amazing. Thank you, Lindy, for sharing your story. And actually, before we get to the questions about your career path, actually, I would like to first ask a question that I think many people watching you might have, which is, I think, exciting to ask for all of us, which is basically you mentioned that you quit from academia quite a few years ago, and you were a professor back then. So that means, you know, and at the same time, you look like you're 30. So my question would be how to be forever young.
So you're my new best friend. Thank you. But no, so I actually came even to graduate school late. I mean, at the time, so I started my PhD when I was 26, turning 27, something like that. So at the time, I thought, you know, oh my gosh, I'm already so old, and had all of those fears. Now, of course, you know, 26 or 27 seems very, very young given where I am now. And, you know, a lady never reveals her age, but it's significantly more than 30. So, but I think one of the things in terms of, you know, sort of taking that question a bit seriously is I do think so for me, I am one of those big nerds. I really do like learning. And, you know, if I put on my more scholarly professor hat, you know, there's a lot of talk about being a lifelong learner, and that's a real positive. And I have to say, I do truly believe that. I do truly believe in being a lifelong learner. I want to know more things today than I knew yesterday or the day before, or even if it's not daily, at least it's sort of weekly, monthly, you know, yearly learning. And so certainly moving from being a professor into the sort of world of tech and startups and development and digital marketing and social media and all of those things that I knew nothing about did open up and continues to open up a new field of things to learn. And I find that quite invigorating. So if you see me smiling, you know, that smile is what keeps me young, and learning keeps me young. Although, I mean, I have noticed, now that I see myself on the video that I have the very long COVID hair. I haven't had a haircut in months. But that's this strange world we live in.
Okay, great. Amazing. So now let me ask you a little bit more about EssayJack, because I would like to know a little bit more about what the product is and what services you offer for people who are watching us, who actually experience the problems with some issues with writing. So if they are curious what you offer, maybe you could explain a little bit more. Let's say I have hard time. I'm not a native. I have a hard time writing my academic papers. What can I find on your platform?
Yeah, that's a really great question, and thank you for asking that. So largely what we set out to do with EssayJack was fill a gap that we as professors found that there was a real gap in terms of students' knowledge. So right now, okay, I'll even date myself to go back to the agent question. When I learned to write, we learned to write by hand, and then, we went and typed it up and printed it out and submitted it. But of course, nowadays, that very, very first draft that somebody starts to write is already happening in a word processing interface. So you open it up, there's a blank screen, and you've got to start writing. And again, content is easy to acquire. So again, back in ye olden days, I would have to listen to teachers and take notes and all the rest of it. And from those notes that I took, I would have content, and I'd create an outline and then, do a rough draft and then type it up. Whereas now it's quite different. So we're learning content constantly through screens. So even this webinar will be posted to YouTube. People can watch it at home. So there's content that's coming at you from a screen, and you can get things, whether it's Google or Wikipedia or wherever it is that you want to find and learn things. So that ability to acquire content or learn is done really well by technology, quite frankly. Obviously there are some significant gaps in terms of like fake news and being able to quality assure the content that you're getting. So you've got to be careful what you take seriously and what you take with a grain of salt when you're finding content online. But that, would have been the same anyway, even if you had, you were in a classroom back in ye olden days, you had good professors and bad professors, and it was up to you to sort of make some decisions about the quality of that content. So content is easy to get. And then on the other end, there's a bunch of really good text editing technologies and software out there. So I'm thinking like, whether it's your built-in spelling and grammar check just on your word processing software, to anything like Hemingway app or Grammarly or things like that can kind of address and fix the actual linguistic issues that you might have with writing. But between getting the content and then making your writing better, there's this whole middle spot, and that's that blank screen. So you may have good ideas, you may be able to acquire content, and then you sit down and there's sort of a blank screen. So to your question, like what do people get when they go to EssayJack? So if you're just a student, so a high school student or a university student, you can go to EssayJack, you can sign up for a free trial and see if it works for you. And what you're going to get are a number of different templates for different pieces of writing. For academics, so junior scholars, graduate students, there's the most advanced template, which is called the academic essay. And that has different sections with tips and prompts and videos that really walks you through the structure of an academic essay. So what are the component parts of an extended background? Or how do you write about your methodology? How do you provide evidence and then explain how that evidence helps to build whatever it is that you're arguing? So there are those kind of pieces with sentence starters, tips, and prompts. So as I said, and then there are other ones like a lab report, an abstract, a TED Talk, some other templates that you can use. So as a student, and you just go to the EssayJack website, you'll find that, and that can help you out. But we also do sell to schools, colleges, and universities. So maybe you're a teacher or a professor yourself, and you want to use EssayJack to teach writing. Maybe you're a tutor and you're working with students who are grappling with learning writing in English and the writing conventions in a kind of Anglo-American context, which still ends up being the kind of dominant modality for scholarly publishing. So even if you're a scholar in Indonesia, chances are the Scopus ranked journals that you're publishing in will be shaped by expectations set by the sort of Anglo-American writing context. So that's like UK and US kind of writing standards. And then the rest of us post-colonial kids like me in Canada end up sort of inheriting some of those conventions as well. And they end up setting certain kinds of global standards. And so what EssayJack can provide the educator is a framework for teaching writing, and it's entirely customizable if you have an educator account. So say if you don't like the built-in tips and prompts that EssayJack gives about an extended background or methodology or what have you, you can go in and change that wording and say, well, here's what my tips would be, or here's what my sentence starters would be, or you know, I'm a world famous YouTube star, so instead of using the EssayJack teaching videos, I'm going to upload my own teaching videos. So there's all of that functionality as well. So as I say, there's the two use cases. As a student, you can log in, have a free trial, see if it works for you, write however much you want. If you want to subscribe, it's $9.99 USD per month or $99.99 USD per year. So we've tried to keep it as reasonably priced as possible. If you're in a school, you can get it for your classroom, or you can simply just recommend it to your own students. So that's kind of how the technology does what it does. And again, because I'm one of the co-founders, my other co-founder is the law professor. For us, it was really important that we had some pedagogical standards as the backbone of the technology. So in education technology, ed tech startup world, often you get entrepreneurs and business people whose priority is business first, and then the education is kind of like the gamified way you get to your business goals. Whereas we did it kind of in an entirely reverse way, because we were like, we want to solve this teachy problem. We want to solve this education problem. And then once we sort of solved that and moved forward and had thousands and thousands of people using the platform, then we're like, oh, okay, we also have to build a business because we need to be able to advertise this digitally. We need to be able to have a help desk and continued development staff who can do upgrades both to the platform, but also just to keep up with the technology. So there are these requirements that mean that we have to pay people. And so in order to pay those people, you need to sort of figure out what's the business model. And so that's kind of what the technology does, and then how from that really and true lifelong learning desire to help people that, we also had to build a business as well, as opposed to sort of being an entrepreneur first and then sort of ed tech second. I was like education first, and then the entrepreneurship kind of grew out of that commitment to helping as many people as possible, I suppose, is the best way to put it.
Great. Actually, thank you so much for this extensive explanation. And I would like to ask you also, since I track your social media activity since some time, and I can see that your following and your numbers of users for EssayJack are growing very fast. Were growing very fast in the last 2 years. So actually, I would like to ask you about the secret behind the success. So what do you think? Because when you have an online business, because effectively this is what it is, right? It's a platform. It has a global reach. So if you have this type of business, then the dynamics is often exponential. This is a nature of this type of business. But I would like to ask you: do you think that this growth curve is again it's a outcome of the fact that you have this particular business model, or was it some specific time or some specific event that triggered this fast growth in the recent 2 years in the past?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and it deserves sort of peeling apart a bit to give a full answer. So there's a lot in the public domain, whether that's traditional media and news outlets or online media and social media. There's a lot about startups. And so there's this whole realm of fixation with like tech startups and, you know, tech CEOs, and they're all going to become billionaires and they're all going to be the next whatever the big platform is. Anything from, you know, Instagram to Facebook, which are now one and the same, to Shopify, to, you know, Reddit, you name it. There are all of these tech companies that have gone to sort of this exponential growth curve. And so there's a lot of conversation about that. And a lot of those conversations are shaped by investors and investment in these companies through subsequent rounds. And so that's one kind of track. And one thing that was really interesting for us when we started EssayJack was that we were very uninterested in that track, because ultimately for us, we were thinking, well, I don't know if this thing that we're inventing, this empty space that we're seeing between content acquisition and final prose, we're inventing a category of thing that doesn't really exist. So does anybody want this? Now, you can make a good presentation to investors about, here's this thing and it's going to be great and we're going to have this exponential growth. But then you have to live with yourself. And so for us, we were like, well, you know what, let's first just see if anybody wants it. And so for the first couple of years, we were building and figuring out the business and figuring out the product. And we didn't take investment. We absolutely just were like, we'll put our savings into it, we'll figure it out. And if nobody wants it, you know, it's embarrassing to us, but nobody else knows, and I'm not in debt to a bunch of angry investors. And then along the way, really and truly, I started to develop my own kind of business philosophy, which is to provide a really valuable product, some of which is for pay and some of which is for free, and then focus on the types of users who are your types of users. So for us, we know particularly students that are transitioning from high school into university, or early graduate students who are at the writing stage. So it could be that they're master's level students writing for the first time, or it could be that you're sitting down to write out a PhD thesis and you're a good researcher, but nobody told you had to do that, you know, that writing was going to be such a big component of what was required. So now that we figured out, like, those are the people who really like our product, it's really valuable, people who are non-native speakers of English, but who have to write in English. And so I said, okay, so if these are the people who really like our product, let's provide value for them. So, you know, we have free blog posts and videos and ebooks and all of those sorts of things, which are content that's valuable. That we're like, we've created it, it has value, here, you can have that content. And if you like it, come try EssayJack for 7 days. And if you like that, then you can subscribe, and there's sort of no mystery to what you're getting. There's no mystery to the value of the product. I'm not promising anything that we're not delivering. And I'm not beholden to investors to sell a thing that I don't know works. So now at this stage in the development, as I say, EssayJack is now 5 years old. So now I can say, okay, we can go to investors now, because it's not about experimenting with a product. Does it work? Does it not work? Now it's saying, okay, we actually have a really great product. We know who wants it. We have growth. We know who uses it, what they like, what they don't like. So now all we have to do is sort of spread the word, because it's a global product that anybody in the world can access. But in order to get in front of as many eyeballs as possible, you do have to have a bit of an ad spend. You do have to be able to put some marketing dollars behind it, which we hadn't done to this point. So our growth is purely and truly, people recommend it to other people, people try it, they like it, they tell other people, they engage with us on social media, or they sign up for the blog and they get the free blog content, and they're like, oh, okay, actually, maybe I should try signing up for this thing and see what happens. And so that's how we've grown to date. Now we're saying, okay, we could actually now put some marketing dollars behind some of our more successful blogs, some of our more successful videos, and drive up those eyeballs to the site. So that's kind of a big picture of what our philosophy has been. To go back to your real question, which is like, kind of how do you build a business online, which is a really good question and a hard question to answer, because ultimately, and again, we were very naive when we started. As I say, we were really focused on the product, not necessarily the business or business model in the early days. But what I naively thought was, well, it's the internet. Put it on the internet and people will find it. And then you, as you become more sophisticated, and as I say, being a lifelong learner, you learn these things along the way. And so you learn things about, even just how Google algorithms work and how things get ranked on pages, and the kinds of copy and content that you need to have, how you optimize various kinds of things for various audiences, all of that, how you get into like paid ads and where you want to put your ad spend. Do you want to put an ad spend, where you want to create online communities? So if you think about it in a non-online world, if you get a loan and you start your restaurant, and your restaurant is on a good street corner with lots of people who walk by, you can assume people will find your restaurant and they'll walk in and they'll come to your restaurant. So long as your restaurant is good, they might come back and they might tell their friends. Whereas the internet, it's like you have to drive people to your street corner to find your thing, because nobody's just magically going to be walking by and find it. So it's that, how do you drive people and drive them intelligently, and also drive the right people? Because in our space, in academic writing, the sad truth is there's a lot of essay mills out there. So basically, where students will get somebody online to do their work for them, and they'll pay them to do their work. And that can happen just at an undergraduate level. So first, second year university, when students find themselves overwhelmed and they don't know what they don't know, and they hire somebody else to do their writing for them, all the way up. Like, there are people who hire people to write their theses and dissertations for them. Again, to me, it's ridiculous, because on the one hand, you rob yourself of the lifelong learning. You rob yourself of the learning potential there. Secondly, obviously, you're guilty of plagiarism and you're a cheater and you're engaged in fraud. And depending on which country you're in, that fraud might actually be illegal. And then thirdly, at some point, you're going to have to get a job, and you can't pay people to do your job for you. So if you haven't acquired those skills along the way, because you've been, hiring essay mills, then you're going to find yourself in the long run in a very disadvantageous situation. So because we were really competing with those, and are competing with those essay mills, we have to make sure that the traffic we drive to our site are people who don't just want somebody to write their essay for them. We're not a good fit. Like, if you want to be a cheater, don't come to EssayJack, because we won't write your work for you. We're going to make you do it. The content is yours. Our platform helps with the structure, and it helps you organize things in a logically coherent manner. But you do have to do some of the thinking. And some people, they don't want to do the thinking. They want to hire somebody to do the thinking for them. So again, in an online space, in an online business model, you need to be able to differentiate, okay, well, these people are the ones we want because they actually want to do the work and they want to learn. And these people are the ones who literally would like to fraudulently complete their degree for whatever the reason. And so again, in terms of targeting those audiences, you want to make sure that you're able to identify the patterns of both types of audiences. And so, as I say, for us, the way we really differentiated that was by not spending any money on that online marketing at the beginning. I mean, for years, for us, it's been, we put out the content and then we track what kind of users come to EssayJack and enjoy what we have to offer. So that now, as I say, if we do an investment raise now and get some marketing money, we can put that marketing money to the real people who want what we have to offer, and not just drive 1 million people to our website every single day who are never going to be EssayJack users. That's a waste of time. So the lesson there in terms of building an online business is not just to try to get lots and lots of eyeballs on your content of whatever business it is that you're building, but to get lots and lots of the right kind of eyeballs. So it's, in my mind, it's better to have fewer people in aggregate know what you're doing if they're the fewer of the right people, as opposed to more people who are never going to be your purchasers. There's no, if you're selling a shoe store online, if you've got shoes that you want to sell online, You want to draw as many people who are shopping for shoes to your site, not just as many people as there are in the world who happen to be browsing anything and everything. And so getting that right, I think, is kind of the key to growth with an online business. And it's a bit of a science and it's a bit of an art, and it requires kind of tweaking things on a regular basis, what works and what doesn't, and quickly saying, okay, well, this is working, so let's do more of this, and this isn't working, so let's just kind of get rid of that. And so again, I'll stop because this is a very long answer to the question, but it is a very good question, and I think it's easy for online businesses and the entire world of sort of tech startups to make it seem as though all you have to do is invent something and it's going to go viral. And that doesn't necessarily happen. I mean, obviously, virality is great. And, after this webinar, obviously, EssayJack and Welcome Solutions are both going to go viral and it's going to be fantastic. But in the absence of that virality, you still want to know that you have a viable business that can grow, I think.
Yeah, that's a fantastic answer. Actually, I agree with absolutely everything you said. First of all, I absolutely share your point of view at how to develop a business, and I know how long it takes to develop a viable business model, and I have exactly the same plan. So only take investors on board when I have the business plan up and working, up and running, and I'm still testing different strategies. So I feel you 100%. And another thing is also to have good content and to let this content be noticed is two different things. And I also kind of learned it on my own skin. But I think, yeah, you definitely mastered the art of online advertising. So I think one can learn a lot from you. And actually, I would like to ask you something very, very general at this stage. And so since I work as a career advisor, I'm often asked about my predictions for the future of the job market. And so how it's going to pan out in the next decade or 2 decades. And of course, it's very hard to answer this question. But I think my feeling is one of the skills that are kind of becoming rare these days is a skill of writing. And one of the reasons is because of the social media and of the supremacy of emoticons. And because I feel that writing is ability to write is like a muscle. So if you don't really exercise, then you slowly lose the ability to do it well. And I think the presence of emoticons and other ways of doing short messaging kind of makes people lazy these days, and so that they don't use the muscle on a regular basis. So that's also one of the reasons why I really love your project, and I lined up to do an webinar with you as soon as I learned about it. And maybe you could share some thoughts on this problem with us. So do you also see this problem, and what do you think is the best way to, in general, to develop and keep your writing skills over the scope of a lifetime?
Yeah, thanks. And I'll respond first to your comment about the business model piece, and then I'll jump into sort of predictions about writing and writing over time. Because I just wanted to say, I think there's probably, and I mean, again, I haven't done any research into this in any real in-depth way aside from anecdotally, but I think there's a gendered component to the more conservative business model that wants to try and test things. I have found, so now that I, again, am in sort of CEO land or entrepreneur land or tech land, I'm in a number of sort of women in business or women entrepreneur communities. And many of the conversations that we have in these communities with smart, accomplished, successful women is that they really want to ensure that they under-promise and over-deliver. So and I feel that way as well. I want to make sure, firstly, that everything I'm going to say is backed up by some kind of data and research. But secondly, that I can stand behind everything that I'm saying. And I mean, obviously, even the best laid plans can be affected by the world. I mean, I don't think anybody planned on a global pandemic hitting in 2020. But I do think that from a general, and I mean, again, obviously there's exceptions to every rule, but generally I find the trait of sort of going in front of investors and telling a great story without all of that backup can often be more masculinist as a trait. And that's, as I say, that's just a throwaway comment. I haven't done the requisite research to back that up with any stats and figures, but anecdotally, that's something. So to find you saying, oh, okay, that's kind of, you want to take your time, build it up, make sure that by the time you go to investors, what you're presenting to them is something that you've lived in for a while. I'm unsurprised because we're both ladies here, and so I think that's something that we might share. And then to go to your question about the importance of writing, I think you've just hit the nail on the head. I find, and this I have done the research on. So statistically speaking, like say looking at the U.S. spends on average $3 billion a year in writing remediation. In workplaces. So in places where people have already graduated, they have their job, and writing is still such an important skill that workplaces are ending up, hiring these consultants to come in and teach writing, because at the end of the day, even though emoticons and sort of text speak and the short forms are great for transactional communication. So that sort of quick, I'm here, meet you at 8, where are you? Those sorts of things, that very short transactional communication, I think is done very well by text speak. And even sharing like a short tweet, again, you can kind of share like hey, it's hot outside, or, here, watch this video or something like that. That very transactional activity can happen in short form. But anything that requires analysis of any sort, academic analysis, professional analysis, requires a longer form of writing to communicate something that's a little bit more complex or a little bit more nuanced. And that's the differentiator between an entry-level job and moving up the ladder. And same goes in academics. So yeah, sure, if you're a bad writer, you'll graduate from high school, that's fine. But as you go along, being able to write well ends up often being the sort of gate that will stay closed if you're unable to acquire that skill. And you can be a really smart, a really thoughtful, a very competent person in your other disciplines. So if you're a chemist or a biologist or whatever, ultimately it's going to be your ability to write up those findings well that will open those doors for you and get you, from a first science degree to a master's degree to a PhD and onward. And same goes if you are in the working world. So if you can communicate well in English enough to get a job, and you could chat nicely in your interview, and that's great. So you get that great entry-level position. But if you want to be promoted up and up and up, chances are you're going to have to produce written reports of some sort. So you might, if you're working in a mining company, you're going to have to analyze what the mining engineers are sending you about the soil quality and make a recommendation based on that to your bosses. And they're going to have to go to the board of directors and all that. And all of that happens in writing. And so I truly do believe that if you want to have the most options available to you, educationally and professionally, being able to write well is just the absolute best skill you can have in your toolkit of skills to help open the most doors possible for you. I also do truly believe that acquiring the skills to write well goes hand in hand with the skill of thinking well. And right now, at this particular moment in time, politically, globally, there's so much that's happening that's absolutely crazy. And I think in large part, not enough people know how to think through complex problems with a greater degree of sophistication. And I think when you can write well, you can also think well, and you can identify, oh, okay, so that person's saying X, but really it doesn't hold up. What they really want is Y, and they're saying X to confuse me or convince me or whatever. And I think being able to see and analyze what people say or what's written can make you feel very empowered in this very strange world, in this very strange moment in time in which we find ourselves, both politically, but also like even with a global pandemic and trying to make sense of what information is accurate, even when it comes to various countries' responses to a global pandemic. And there are people who say it's a hoax, or people who say it's fake, or people who say that. And being able to take that information, read and analyze, I think can make what is otherwise, like, this is actually quite scary. Like, it's quite scary that borders are closed and people are working from home, and you don't know if you should wear a mask or shouldn't wear a mask, or, what are your risks? And I think the more that you can read and understand, quality research, and be able to understand an argument, be able to understand statistics, all of that goes into being able to write critically, is also being able to read critically and then think about, oh, okay, so that person is actually not making a good argument as to why I should or shouldn't wear a mask. But this person has actually made something that's convincing. And it's convinced me not through a bunch of empty rhetoric or logical fallacies, but convinced me by building a coherent and logical case. And so, to go back to your question, which is like, oh my gosh, does writing still matter? We can quickly text, and there's emojis, and that can communicate things. And so my answer to that is, yeah, the quick texts are great. And I don't want to be so much of a grump that I dismiss the significance of the quick texts for transactional stuff, or even just to validate, like, I'm here, I can send my mom a hug or my sister a kiss or whatever. And that's great. And it's a way to be connected. But it's that long form writing that is important academically and professionally. And then again, it is intimately linked to that ability to think critically. And it's that critical thinking and critical writing that I think is crucial to making the world a better place. Like, if we could all think better, we'd make better choices. And that, to me, is very motivating in terms of, I don't know that EssayJack itself is up to the task of fixing everything that's wrong in the world. But if I can play my small part to helping people to think and write better, I really do, like, that's a contribution that I will be happy about when I look back on my life. So I do think writing really does matter more than just like, hey, write because it's important to get an A. Like, I really, truly, and deeply believe that writing is a crucial skill.
I couldn't agree more, Lindy. And actually, if I could add to this, what you just said, I also think that writing skills can save you from a lot of trouble. Actually, I remember the times when I was still an undergrad at the University of Warsaw, and I was doing 3 different masters at the same time, mathematics, physics, and psychology. And like, if I could describe myself as a student, I would say not present, because there was always too much to do. So I was always not there. And I had to ask for forgiveness to all these deans and professors all the time. And I think if not my ability to write very heartbreaking emails and persuade people to my points and ask for forgiveness, then I probably wouldn't be a master's graduate today. So I think indeed writing is so influential in your life, and it can really save you from a lot of trouble. And now I would like to ask you a little bit different question about the kitchen behind your business, since I know that actually the co-founder of your company is also your partner in life. So I have that question. I think many people would have that question if they. About your business. So the question is, how does it work for you? So since I know that for some couples it's a blessing that they have a business together, whereas for some other couples it can be there are certain drawbacks. So I'm very curious how it plays out for you.
Yeah, and there are a couple of different ways of answering that question. The sort of being in business with your spouse, which, as you say, can be both a blessing and a curse. So a couple of things, and one that I want to make really clear, and this goes back even to the sort of business model of tech startup and investors and the choices that you make. And one thing that I always think it's important when I tell my story, such as it is to be honest about some of the finance part of things. So again, social media and traditional media, loves to tell the story about, like, investment this and, raised a Series D or, 20 million, 100 million, whatever. But the truth of the matter is, you do need some money to start a business of whatever sort, whether that's going to be the money that pays your rent or your mortgage and buys your groceries, or the money that goes into developing whatever it is that your business is going to be. And so you kind of have to be clear at the outset where you're getting that money from. So if you're lucky and you have family business and you've got rich parents and they're willing to be your backers, that's great. If you have a trust fund and you're able to sort of take your independent wealth, also great. If you happen to have been bought out of your last job and have a nice chunk of money, also great. So for many of us, that's not the situation, and it wasn't the situation for us. But for my husband and I, we're like, well, if one of us keeps the job, the professor job, and that's his case, he's the law professor. I was like, if you keep your job, then we can still like buy groceries and live, and I can do this experimental startup thing for free. So I won't pay myself, which, of course, it's a bit of a blow to the ego, but you tell yourself that you're building value in this company and that ultimately you'll be remunerated out of the company as the company grows. But in the early days, it's a lot of hard work, and you don't get that benefit of being like, I worked so hard and I got a paycheck at the end of the month. It's like, I worked so hard and I worked so hard, and there's sort of nothing to show of it. So I do want to be clear. In our case, we made that financial. I mean, it's a professional choice, but it's also a financial choice, and that was the way that we were able to kind of swing things and get EssayJack off the ground without having to get investment money in the early days. And so again, it's all fine and good for me to tell the story how we've held off institutional investment for 5 years, but that's been based on being in a position to do that. So if you're drowning under student loan debt and don't happen to have a spouse who has a job who can pay the bills, then whether you like it or not, you're probably going to have to get that institutional investment or debt of whatever sort earlier on. So that, I think it's just important to flag. So I flag that there's that kind of financial piece. He can pay the bills, and I can do this experimental. I mean, it's less experimental now, but in the early days, it felt very experimental. And then there's the other piece, which is like, so how do you make decisions when you're both co-founders, but you're also spouses? And so again, we were very clear at the beginning that only one of us ultimately could be the decision maker, because it could potentially kill the company if everything ended up being like a marital discussion. Because if any of the viewers are married, marital discussions can go for a long time. I've been married coming up on 12 years and I still haven't convinced, my husband to do laundry. So like, that's a long-standing discussion that we have. But in a business, you can't just have those long-term things that pop up every now and then that sometimes happen in marriages. And so we had to be very clear, and we were very clear that in this case, I would be the decision maker. And that his role was in terms of being supportive and content development, and particularly because he's in the classroom with students, that it's important for him to pay attention to what students want and what their needs were. So we were really clear in terms of identifying who does what, and how that happened, and how decisions are made. And it was interesting, though, because a couple of years ago, so he was on leave from his university and was thinking about, okay, well, does he want to come and work more full-time in EssayJack? Because he was very intimately involved in the development of the product, so the actual EssayJack platform. And then he was like, okay, so he was on sabbatical, and maybe, we'll think about, is there a place in the company for him? And which, I was fine. Figure it out and see if there's a place for you. And what was interesting is that he realized, like, in a business, once you've developed the product, and I mean, again, the product is continually being developed, but a lot of the creative work that happened at the beginning has happened and is now a little bit more institutionalized. So now new features come about because there's a need in the market for them, as opposed to us thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great if, and that's kind of how we originally developed the product. And so now as a company, there are slices like there's sales, there's marketing, there's content development, there's human resources, there's finance, there's, investor relations, there's a whole bunch of stuff that is just like a regular job at any other company. And what he found is that he's not really a sales guy. He certainly isn't an operations guy. He doesn't want to do the sort of day-to-day, being on top of people. He doesn't want to think about hiring and firing and, all of those human resources or technical, like the bookkeeping and accounting and finance and all of those. And so ultimately he was like, actually, I'm just happier being a professor. So I'm going to keep on being a professor. And then he and I can have those high level conversations. Like, what is the vision for the business? Where do we want it to go? What are some other niches we see as fruitful areas for expansion? Those kinds of conversations. Whereas what I've discovered is that while I am still academic in some ways, in other ways, I'm not. So in other ways, I can jump in and I can do sales and marketing, and I have, one-on-one calls with our developers and meetings and, all of that kind of internal operational behavior that has to happen to keep a machine going forward. And I have enough of an ability to be that lifelong learner, and I want to learn all these different component parts so that I do that, and then I kind of report back to him. And so for us, it absolutely works. And it works because, as I say, first, we were sort of clear about the sort of financial division of labor. Secondly, we were clear about the sort of hierarchy and who is ultimately the deciding person. And it's me, which works great for me. And then thirdly, as it turned out, he is happier in his job as a professor than wanting a job in EssayJack, which is sort of an interesting, sort of an interesting reality that he came to. And one final point I'll say to that, which is very fascinating to me, is that in conversations now, like in a typical investment conversation, so by that I mean like, the venture capital firms. So they seem to always be a little bit worried when there's a married co-founder couple, like, oh my gosh, well, what happens with the company if people get divorced or whatever? And I just think, whether you're co-founders of a company or not, anybody who is in a founder of a startup, if their marriage breaks down, they will not have the bandwidth to drive the startup forward. So largely speaking, you should probably care about your founders, whether they're married to, their co-founders or not. To me, I just think that it's that ability to prioritize relationships and having people be happy and productive and do well. And that's, again, related to a whole sort of broader sort of sharing of vision. So if you've got a partner or an investor or your banks or whatever, you want to make sure that you share the vision of where the company's going. And whether that means that you're married to your co-founder or not, it's being very clear that, yeah, we're on the same page and we're going in the same direction. And that, I think, can help solve a lot of hiccups that may happen along the way.
Okay, perfect answer. I'm still curious about how your daily life looks like. So are there specific hours when you are life partners and then specific hours when you are business partners, or is it more like a fluid dynamics?
Yeah, it's you know what, it depends on the day, to be honest. But so typically, my day is shaped often very much by work, probably a bit too much by work. So I work probably longer hours than I should, but we're very clear that sort of morning coffee, kind of before the day starts, when we get up and we have that coffee in the morning together. So morning coffee is our time, and when I say morning coffee, it's usually like a pot or two of coffee, and that's when we talk and we, reconnect, and that's definitely sort of couple time. And then at the end of the workday, whenever that happens, we usually go for a walk. And again, that's like couple time to go for a walk and try to not talk about anything EssayJack related, to sort of really have that break. And it's better now, I think, as the company has gotten a little bit more mature along the way. It's a little bit easier to have some of that separation. When we very first started it and we're launching and sort of like, hey, does anybody want this product we invented? it was really 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That was just all we could talk about. We probably bored each other and all of our friends and family, because that was our everything. And so we joked about it, because we both went through PhDs. And during our PhDs, there's also this tendency to see the world through the lens of whatever it is that you're researching. So everything that you kind of see out there in the world, you filter through what you're currently writing about if you're in the throes of the doctoral experience. And so we had both had that and knew that it passed, that you don't just continue going through the world seeing everything through the lens of your doctoral research. And so when we were in those early days of EssayJack, and everything was through the lens of EssayJack, we would see both opportunities, but also everything just got filtered through, like, can we use this here? Can we, and that as well was like a phase that we've kind of made our way through, so that EssayJack isn't the topic of conversation in our marriage all day, every day anymore. I mean, obviously it's still an important piece, but it's not the most important piece, and it doesn't shape our every waking conversation the way that it, to be honest, it did for quite some time in the early days. As I say, we're 5 years in, and probably the first 2 years was pretty all day, every day EssayJack. But we're still smiling, and we've now also been indoors with each other for 6 months of a pandemic, and we're still happily married. So seems to be working.
Fantastic. Great. So could I now please ask you a little bit about your general, like the lessons that you got from your entrepreneurial journey, and also maybe before, from the times when you were thinking of transition to industry. So the question is there anything you can think of that you would do differently if you had a chance?
Yeah. So, I mean, one thing certainly that I would do differently is, I think, so with respect to EssayJack, I probably would have gone a little bit slower with some things. Like we certainly, released the product, before it was fully ready to be released, and then just kind of figured things out along the way. And I think I would have, if I knew then what I know now, I think I would have given us a couple more months to see things through. But you don't know then what you know now. So that's one thing. Another thing that I think, not that I would have done differently per se, but that is certainly a learning that I've achieved since leaving the academy and getting out sort of in industry, is that there's a real difference in time scale. So in the academy, typically everything moves very, very slowly. So like a semester that you're teaching is like from September to December. You could submit an article for publication, and you wouldn't hear back, even if it was going to be peer reviewed, for 6 weeks if you're lucky. By the time it's actually peer reviewed, it's been another 12 weeks. Then you might have revise and resubmit. So you've got another chunk of time. In terms of the job cycle, often jobs get posted and you then apply 3 months later, and then you don't even hear if you're shortlisted for another 3 months, for a job that starts like a year after the original posting. And so often as academics, you get very used to that slow sense of time. Even writing an article, if you're lucky, it'll take 12 weeks. Often it takes much longer. Dissertations themselves are multi-year projects. So you get used to thinking of the world in these longer periods of time. And outside of the academy, again, it's different industry to industry, but typically things just move a lot faster. You're even in terms of a business, you're looking at like week over week changes in cash flow. You're definitely looking at month over month changes, and everything is like quarterly reporting. I mean, a quarter in an academic, in an academic year, a quarter, you may write an article in a quarter, like it's just the sense of time. A quarter is like October, November, December is a quarter of a year. In an academic framework, not much changes between October and December in your life as an academic. You could be running an experiment that takes, multiple years. And so thinking that once you get out in industry, stuff just moves differently, that was a thing that I had to adjust to. So it's not something per se that I would change, but it is certainly something that I was a little bit unprepared for, because my sense of, even in terms of evaluating EssayJack's success in those early days and the kinds of changes, like I really was wanting to make sure, well, we want to get through the first year, be able to see, okay, year over year, what's happening. And again, because it's an educational product that's tied to the academic calendar to a certain extent, there are certain times of the year where people are writing more and certain times of the year where people are writing less. And so we would have, like, our bankers would say, well, how many new users did you get this week over last week? And I'm going, well, like, it's December vacation. Nobody's writing right now. So we didn't get any, that's not the way the business works. And that was very obvious to me, but it's not obvious to people outside of the particular framework of education or the academy more broadly. And so that, again, it took me a while to sort of figure out that the things and the time scale that I was operating in were just very different for other people. And again, that difference is fine, but you need to be aware of it and adjust where necessary and as necessary, because people outside the academy, they just don't see things in the same kind of time frame. And again, this is maybe helpful too for people who are thinking about jobs outside of the academy, because sometimes you can think, well, I don't know what I'm going to do next. If I'm not a researcher, if I'm not a scholar, if I'm not a professor, and you can find a job and you can think, oh, okay, well, I could apply for that and maybe I can do it. But often you'll hold off from applying because you can't envision yourself really doing that long term. But the thing is, you don't have to do that long term. Like, you could get that job and literally within 3 weeks, you could be in another department in the same company. And that kind of mobility and changefulness and progression through the ranks and all the rest is very, very common outside of the academy. So you could start with one job, in 5 weeks be in a different job in the same company, within 5 months be promoted, 2 different times up to 2 different levels or whatever. And so in that same time period, as an academic, your life wouldn't change at all, and you wouldn't expect that it would change at all. So that, again, as I say, it's not an exact answer about what I would do differently, but I certainly didn't know that when I started this post-academic world view that I'm in now.
Okay, yeah, I couldn't agree more. Again, it's really heavy when you're a budding entrepreneur to adjust to this new dynamics. That's for sure. And okay, and another question I would have is, do you have any specific piece of advice? So you just gave your advice for researchers who are thinking of moving to industry. Is there anything else you would like to add to this? Anything specific?
Yeah, so one sort of specific piece of advice that I think is really valuable is to apply for everything, even jobs that you think are only like maybe an imperfect fit. Because I think the process of applying for various types of jobs can also give you confidence. So there's that. You can get confidence by applying for a bunch of jobs. 2, the practice is really good. So practice having a bunch of interviews, even for jobs that you don't want, but that you get that experience of speaking to people in industry and sort of seeing the way that they do things. Thirdly, by applying for a bunch of jobs, you also see how different organizations are structured, and you start to create a mental map of, like, because some jobs you've got directors and managers and VPs and senior VPs or whatever. And some of those structures are very opaque if you're unfamiliar with them. And so the more you apply for jobs, the more you start to get the lay of the land of who does what and how are those divisions organized in a particular company or a particular industry. And that can help you navigate that world and sort of see, oh, okay, I should be aiming for director level of that type of job or whatever the case may be, and it can help refine your job search. I think another reason why I would recommend, so reason number 4, why I would recommend applying for sort of anything and everything, is that that's also a way to network. So you often don't know what you don't know, and you don't know who you don't know. And so if you get into a position where you put your best application forward, maybe you've had an interview or even just a chat with the person who's hiring, they'll be able to identify, like, maybe you're not a good fit for that job, but they know, oh, well, there's this other job that's going to be opening up in 6 months that you would be perfect for. Or there's this other person I know and their company is going to be hiring in exactly your field. And there is absolutely no way that you would have that information as an outsider. But once you sort of are getting in the mix, you can get in front of more people. And that, I think, is helpful. So those would be, the 4 reasons why I always recommend, apply for anything and everything. It can build up your confidence. It can give you experience. It can help you navigate the different kinds of worlds that exist in industry. And then finally, you can get some really valuable connections who can help you out in your job search. I mean, some people will be like me, and they'll want to be the one creating the business and creating the jobs. But a lot of people aren't entrepreneurs at heart and don't want to be entrepreneurs, which is absolutely 100% fine. I mean, there are sometimes when I think, goodness me, why did I become an entrepreneur? But I think for everybody who's thinking about alternative paths, be they entrepreneurial or not, the more information you can get about how the world works, outside of the fields that you might be specifically trained in, the better your chances are to find a happy place where you're going to be fulfilled professionally.
Actually, I got one question when we were talking about people who might or might not be entrepreneurs at heart. So I'm very curious if in the past there were already some signs overshadowing the fact that one day you might be a successful entrepreneur. Because from my experience, we often ignore those signs for a long time, just because at school typically we are not being told that we might be a successful business owner. This is one of the talents or one of the qualities that typically is overlooked in the school system. So when you look back at your life, are there any signs that you now can see that would tell you, yes, I was born as an entrepreneur?
In hindsight, I have to admit, yes. So originally, like, I would answer, no way. I never wanted to be an entrepreneur. This wasn't a thing that was on my radar. I mean, I'm a book lover. Or this way. That's, it's my books. So, I like reading and I like writing, and that's what I wanted to do. But the way you phrased the question, which is like, are there any of these signs that you maybe overlooked, makes me kind of change my answer. And I will say, so certainly as a kid growing up, I was one of those, I guess you would call them bossy kids. I was one of those girls who now we would say, don't call girls bossy, say they have leadership potential. So I was one of those kids. And I certainly, the thing that I even say to my mom to this day, and she jokes about the fact that I said it even as a little kid, was, you're not the boss of me. Whenever I was going to do something, I was going to do it my own way. And, you're not the boss of me. And I find those signs, which I sort of overlooked as a kid, are certainly aspects of my character, which I think lead me to be entrepreneurial. Like, that's kind of, who I am as a person. I have that kind of personality trait. I also would say, so growing up in my family, so my family owns hotels in Manitoba, the province where I'm originally from. And that was a company that was started by my grandparents. And my dad runs it now, and my brother and sister work for the company. And so for me, business always meant that particular family business. And I'm not motivated by that family business. I mean, I certainly think who I am is shaped in part by that family business and by a sense of hospitality and service orientation. I think those are things that I've taken from growing up in a family business. But I never wanted to work in the family business. I wanted to do my own thing. And so I never recognized business or entrepreneurship as something that was interesting for me, because otherwise I would have just joined the family as opposed to started off and done my own thing.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so last question I have for you today is, what should we wish you and your company for the future?
Well, I think wish us tons of success, but also certainly, getting the word out is the most important. So if you're teaching English, if you're teaching writing, if you yourself are a writer, check out EssayJack.com. It's, as I say, it's free to sign up for the platform. It's free to subscribe to the blog. See if what we're offering is of value to you. Recommend it to your students. Recommend it to people you know. The more the merrier. And so we wish from your audience that they are able to achieve their dreams and write well. And we wish that they help us achieve our dreams and reach more people so that more people can be critical thinkers and critical writers.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lindy, for joining us today and for sharing all these wonderful insights. I'm very proud of you, and I think you're a great female leader, great example of how also an academic can be successful in the world of business. And I wish you all the best for the future. We'll be we'll be observing your development, and I'm sure your future great success with great interest. And I hope that many of the viewers of the webinar will also be interested in checking out EssayJack. I will definitely check out myself. And thank you so much again for being with us today. And maybe I can still give a floor to you for a second.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I mean, it's. I hope that this is valuable to people who are sort of thinking about life outside the academy. I mean, as I say, as I said at the beginning, the thing that I want to be able to offer people is that sense of hope that you can land on your feet, even though when you start leaving the academy, lots of things can be very frightening and unknown and even unknowable. But what do they say? To climb a mountain starts with the first step. So take that first step, whatever it might be.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you for watching. And if you would like to see more of this content, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for being with us, and have a great day.
Thank you.